Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the new news. My name is Paul, and I am the host for the night. I hope everyone is doing well, and I hope that their families are doing well, and that I'm happy that you're going to be able to join us today in order to watch what's going on in the daily news. Of course, we are an organization, a small organization that's trying to put together the daily news in as unbiased of a way as possible. Of course, we can't always do that 100%. But with that means that every single stream that we do is going to be about donating to a cause. Whether that means that we're going to have fundraisers on these streams, or whether that's in the donation links below. We do have donation links that focus on whatever the topic is for the night. We also have a Discord community where we also have those donation links and keep that updated as well with places that we vetted. That way we know whatever money you're giving to these fundraisers is actually going to help people in the world that are dealing with crises all over the place. And currently that focus is in Ukraine. So if you can't give a lot, give a little. Everything helps. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and roll right into the news. There's been some pretty interesting international developments today. The first, of course, we're going to focus first and foremost on Ukraine. And the first thing is that we have more videos of the destruction from Borodyanka, and we've seen Borodyanka. It's been pretty destroyed for what it has been since we've seen the liberation of it. Once Russian forces originally pulled out of this area northwest of Kyiv, there's been a lot of footage and pictures, media coming out of this area, mostly focused on Irpin and Bucha and Hostomel. Sorry, and we showed some footage of Borodyanka, but even more has come out today. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. We're going to go ahead and cut it there pretty short. Most of the country of Ukraine that has seen the heavy fighting, such as the areas north of the Kyiv, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Sumy, Izium, the Donbas, which includes Donetsk, Luhansk, Mariupol, Kherson, Mykolaiv, all of these areas have seen intense fighting. And the images coming out of these locations look more of something reminiscent of Stalingrad than they do of a modern 21st century city. It's unbelievable. It's something that hasn't really been seen since World War II. The level of destruction in this country is almost indescribable. So it's glad that we have these pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, and videos are priceless for a reason. So always good to be able to show things like that. Just the level of destruction that in no one's mind, unless we had that, would just be incomprehensible. So we continue to show videos like that just to kind of paint the picture of what's going on. Talking about Irpin, Bucha, Hostomel, and the areas heavily affected by what is pretty daunting evidence of war crimes on the part of Russia at this point. We move up to Chernobyl. Chernobyl was retaken by Ukraine. In fact, Ukraine has actually secured the Ukrainian-Belarusian border because all forces in this area have pulled out. All Russian occupational forces have withdrawn from the northwest of Kyiv. However, the scenes coming out of Chernobyl are very, very similar to what is being seen in Bucha, Irpin, and Hostomel. At this point, it doesn't look to be on the same level. However, they are no less, how should I say, there's no less horrific than what we have seen. And so we have a few photos coming out of Chernobyl today showing some of those scenes. Very similar things, lots of destroyed vehicles, lots of destroyed buildings. Vehicles indiscriminately crushed, maybe, or may not have been with the occupants inside, as we saw in Bucha. Just seems to be indiscriminate destruction and violence on the part of the Russian occupational forces the entire time they have been here in Ukraine. The entire time that they were here, they've done nothing but commit acts of violence against the civilian population. And that's all that we've been able to see. Other than that, there hasn't been a lot of other footage that came out during the occupation within these places, just off of the Ukrainian side. We don't know if that's because it's being censored. Probably it is being censored. We also know that Russian forces, for the most part, had their phones and everything confiscated from them prior to entering Ukraine and prior to the invasion even beginning. Pretty quiet up along the Chernihiv, Sumy area. There hasn't been a lot. Same with Kharkiv. There has not been a lot. We did say yesterday that by our sources and what we could find, that the majority, if not all, of Russian forces had officially withdrawn from the northern front. Meaning they withdrew out of the Chernihiv and Sumy regions and or, for the most part, have. This hasn't changed yet to say that they all have, simply because we don't have the information to say that. There hasn't been any more evidence of further withdrawal today, one way or the other. So as we find videos of Ukrainian forces pushing into these areas and actually liberating them, we'll be able to push that video evidence out and move this front line as necessary. However, as we go down towards Izium, the Ukrainian armed forces today did confirm that a TOS-1A was being used. It was captured earlier in the war from Russia and is now being used against Russian forces in the area of about Izium. This could have occurred a couple of days ago at this point before it was confirmed. However, we do know that it is being used. So it's good that we can see Ukrainian forces using some of that captured equipment that has been left behind by the Russian forces during this invasion. We've seen other equipment being used, Russian tanks, Russian infantry fighting vehicles, tons of Russian trucks and MRAPs such as the Gaz Tiger, but not the TOS-1A, which is famous for being able to use those thermal barrack munitions that were talked about so heavily in the opening stages of the war. And there's actually a photo. I believe this appears that this still has the markings on it from Russia, but that is the TOS-1A being used. So that was what was released by the Ukrainian ministry. However, as we move into the Donbas and down towards Mariupol, there has been a lot of developments in this area very recently. We do know about a week ago, Russia said that it was shifting its military focus from the northern area, northwest of Kyiv and Sumy and Chernihiv, and they were shifting that over into the Donbas, which they already relatively had significant control over. Whether that was through proxy or direct control, that's up for debate depending on who you ask at this point. It was pretty well known that Russian forces were at least influencing the Donbas and supporting the separatists to a large extent, and now they are just officially there now. And so with that, we have seen footage that the Russian forces hit what was a nitric acid tank near the village of Rubizny, and that gas is very, very poisonous. Ukrainian officials told the local population to seal their windows, seal their doors, do not go outside, because that gas could very well kill them. It's extremely poisonous, and we have a photo of that today. Likewise, there's been a lot of developments in Luhansk, including the fact that Bakhmut was actually hit with artillery and airstrikes today. It seems a lot of that was actually unexploded ordnance that came down. It seems to have been a lot of duds, or maybe it hit the soft ground, though I can't say for certain. At least for some of them, it probably just hit the soft ground and didn't go off. But we do know that there was some pretty significant, at least, shelling here today, or attempts to shell. We can see that munition just buried itself into the pavement of the sidewalk. Same thing here, just buried itself into the ground. Once again, straight into that soft earth, that mud, that Rasputitsa mud that's so famous in Ukraine, that to be bogging down those tanks is now absorbing munitions. And right through the local park, we can see there's rides in the background. So not only does this show that they are shelling these areas, whether that's rockets or airstrikes, they're shelling known residential areas, known civilian areas. This is no way a military target at all. There's not a children's ride that's ever going to be a military target. So we do know that they are still shelling and bombing civilian areas. We've seen evidence of it before, and it seems that it just isn't probably going to be stopping, at least on the Russian end of things. That's kind of their doctrine. The best way I've ever been able to describe the train of thought for the Russian military is versus the U.S. military. It's kind of backwards. In the U.S., the infantry go first, the tanks go second. The tanks support the infantry, whereas in Russia, the tanks go first, the squishy infantry go behind them. You can even see that mentality in their turret shields on a tank. When it lifts the turret shield up, NATO, it rises behind them. In Russian equipment, it rises in front of the troop commander to protect them. Same thing, it seems that Russia, in the United States, we say, are there civilians in the area that could become casualties? In Russia, it appears they say, is there the possibility of a military target? It's just kind of their ideology when it comes to dealing with military situations. Civilians and infrastructure seem to not... It appears to be more thought of as collateral than anything else. I wouldn't say they are... Well, for some areas, at least in the occupied zones, we have seen that they've purposely gone out of their way to commit war crimes. The shelling, however, I think is just a result of their mentality of it's going to be collateral. It's going to happen anyway. As we move over into Kadivka, one of the neighborhoods of Kadivka, Stahanov, was we once again saw Russian jets. We saw helicopters and jets flying in this area yesterday. We see another group of Su-25s again today. That only indicates that the air campaign in this part of the country is still continuing. They're once again very low flying, as they have been, to avoid those Ukrainian air defenses, simply because the skies over Ukraine are still contested even 41 days into the war. Despite numerical advantage, despite in some ways technological advantage with some of the newer aircraft, Russia has been unable to successfully gain any dominance in the air to support their ground forces, and it has really killed their ability to really put combined arms warfare to its max potential when dealing with the Ukrainian forces. Great for Ukraine, not so great with Russia. So let's take a look. Not a long video, but enough to show you kind of what's going on. Those aircraft are similar. They're using a similar role to the A-10 is for the United States and NATO countries that have them. They have a large cannon. I believe it's also a 30 millimeter, and they carry lots of munitions. They're usually a little bit slower. They're attack aircraft. They're ground attack aircraft and ground support aircraft, not really fighter jets, such as the MiG-29 or anything you're going to see. We also know that there has been some forced conscription in Donetsk. We saw some videos today and some images of men being just pulled off of the street in Donetsk and forced into fighting for the Russian military. There are actually some places where men see that happening and they just turn around and leave. They don't, because not everyone supports the war going on in this region. There are separatists. There have been separatists, but no one wants to be forced into fighting for this cause. It's not everyone believes in it. So we do know it's happening. However, that's about all the information we have regarding it. Mariupol, which has been the center for a lot of the controversies in the war until the instances up in Bucha, Irpin, now Chernobyl, Hostomel, after all those came out. But Mariupol has been one of the most devastating parts of the entire war. It's been under siege for well over a month. It is a huge humanitarian crisis, military crisis for Ukraine, and it's been a sore thumb, or it's been a thorn in the Russian side since this whole campaign began. At the very beginning of the war, they landed amphibious troops here, and they still haven't taken this city since day one. So we have some more information. It's been a little quiet in the recent days in Mariupol, but we have some more information coming out today. And one of those things is, not surprisingly, Russia destroyed another school. So we have pictures of that. It's gone. It's going to have to get demolished. I don't think anyone was going to school at the time, because I don't think anyone's been in school for a while now. Hopefully the children at this point, at least most of them, those that could, have left. And we do know that refugees have left. But the last report we had, 90% of Mariupol was completely destroyed. It will have to be, if it's not flattened already, it will have to be demolished in order to rebuild the city. Russia also today stated that a large number of Ukrainian Marines surrendered. These Marines were supposedly of the 503rd Marine Battalion for Ukraine. There is photograph evidence that points in the direction that this has been staged, as well as the fact that Ukraine authorities, including the 503rd Marine Battalion themselves, officially have said that this did not happen. Russia is saying that they surrendered in droves, that they surrendered en masse. However, the photo evidence that we've seen from some of these videos and watching some of these videos is pretty suspicious. We didn't want to push any propaganda here, so we left those out. However, it's pretty obvious that they're wearing Russian gear. They're not wearing their Ukrainian Marine uniforms, their equipment, anything of the like. It seems more like Russian and separatist equipment, and it looks like they just took off their armbands and posed as Ukrainians being captured. So at this point, we're saying this is probably just another propaganda campaign. I do believe that there are probably some Ukrainians that just can't go on, and they may be surrendering here and there, but en masse, probably not. I can't believe that would be happening. Otherwise, the city probably would have fell a long time ago. And it still is not been captured by Russian forces. However, we have seen a lot of destruction coming out of this. Reuters today actually posted this video. We found it on another Ukrainian website, but it does have the Reuters logo. But the destruction in Mariupol, when you just can't think it could get any worse, it does. It's the epitome of why people shouldn't fight warfare in the 21st century. Because the destruction on Mariupol is unlike anything seen since World War II, and I said this earlier in other parts, but Mariupol especially is best described as one of the villages in France that's been preserved since World War II, that the rubble hasn't been cleared, the cars haven't been removed, because it was such an awful destruction that wiped that city completely off the map that it needed to be memorialized in order to remember the atrocities that occurred. Mariupol at this point has pretty much reached that status of destruction. So let's take a look. Now, as someone personally, as someone who has seen some rather indecent things done in other parts of the world in my time, while I was in the Middle East, the level of destruction and the atrocities being committed inside of the country of Ukraine are abhorrent, appalling, horrendous. And this is my personal opinion. This is not part of the news itself. I want that to be known. But the destruction of this level, of this scale, it could only closest comparison be to things such as Aleppo. That would be the only, or Mosul would be another good example of destruction in the 21st century in warfare. Two large first world nations have not fought each other until now with the full backing of their economies since World War II. It was the longest lasting period of peace in the world, and it has officially ended after 80 years. And what is being seen, personally for me, is absolutely appalling, and I can't even imagine, as someone who has seen these similar things personally in other parts of the world. It's that bad. And it makes me sick to my stomach. And talking about some of this stuff, especially the Bucha European Hostomel area and the atrocities committed, really, I had a very hard time talking about it. So, with that, we're going to get back a little bit to the news section, but I needed to get that off of my chest. I think it's worth noting, at least, as an individual, as a human being, it's very hard to stand to this. But moving on, back to the news. We do know that a civilian cargo ship was hit, and we're pretty sure it's been sunk, at least damaged beyond repair, in Mariupol. It was flagged as a ship of the Dominican Republic. It was a cargo container ship. It was hit. One crewman was injured. Everyone was evacuated by the Azov battalion, who still control that part of Mariupol, and they are currently evacuated to at least as safe of a location as they can get within the city, and are receiving treatment for any wounds they may have. But this is the ship.
Я моторист парохода «Азбург». Находимся мы под доминиканским флагом. Пришли в Мариуполь 23 числа и находились до сих пор под обстрелами Российской Федерации. Вчера попала в машинное отделение ракета, я не успел уйти. Нам капитан вызвал помощь, солдаты украинские взялись к себе, предоставили первую допомогу. Все эвакуировались полностью с парохода. Пароход сгорел.
And that was one of the crewmen. And we still have more news coming out of here. The TikTok army, also known as the Chechen forces, apparently have now denazified enough empty buildings, and they have now moved on to denazifying doors, because Lord knows the Chechens don't actually fight anybody. They are just there for a giant propaganda campaign that, if I didn't actually know about the Chechens, I would think it was satire. But it's that bad. But we can now have a video of them denazifying Ukrainian doors. So let's take a look at that. We have a little bit of a laugh here. Because the door was a Nazi, I guess. I don't know. But the fighting I'm seeing coming from the Chechens, or fighting, quote unquote, I am seeing coming from the Chechens. These guys look they just look the part of like an Islamic State militant. Like, all I can just imagine him doing that classic Middle Eastern squat and shoot over your head with an AK kind of thing. Because these guys, I have never seen them do a single thing so far that was tactically at all kind of something you should do in a war zone. Let alone, like, I know that the methods of fighting aren't always pretty great for any group. Like, not everyone has the experience, but these guys, if they were actually fighting someone, they'd all be dead by now. Hands down, they'd all be dead. There is no question about it. And that's how we know that they're shooting at empty windows and empty buildings, and they're now denazifying doors. However, back to a little bit more heavy news, heavy-hearted news. President Zelensky actually today spoke to Ukrainian news agencies about the issues he is having militarily of trying to get to Mariupol, and he said today that it is going to be extremely difficult to break the siege of Mariupol militarily. He has put forward a proposal to the negotiation team in Russia, or for Russia, saying, let's open a corridor so we can bring out our wounded and are dead, so we can properly bury them. We'll take them by vehicle to Berdyansk, and then from there we'll pick them up with a boat and bring them back into Ukrainian-held territory, and say like Odessa, so we can actually bury them properly. There has been no response thus far from Russia. However, I do not believe that the Russians will do this, and they will say, even if they do, they will use it as an excuse to likely say that they were bringing in equipment and supplies and whatever else they need to continue to fighting the Russians. regardless of how Ukraine probably tries to spin this, but the proposal is there, and we do have a video of President Zelensky talking about this very thing. So let's go ahead and give it a little watch.
Це дуже складно. Прям дуже складно. Військова деокупація на сьогодні, от прямо на сьогодні, військова деокупація Маріуполя складна. І хлопці ці, яким дуже складно, вони це прекрасно знають. Ми реально на контакті майже щоденно. І, їм важко. Вони дуже міцні, це правда, їм важко, причому важко по-різному. Там різним людям по-різному важко. Не хочу говорити якісь тонкощі, але так воно і є.
We're going to go ahead and stop it there, because this thing runs for a little bit, and I'm sure you can find this if you would like. However, as we can see, especially after yesterday, we saw a lot of emotion out of President Zelensky yesterday when he went to Bucha, understandably so, because a lot of those atrocities haven't been cleaned up yet because they're not safe to clean up yet. They're still working through and making sure a lot of the bodies aren't booby trapped or anything. 410 bodies have been recovered and safely. They have been safe to have been moved, and they're being prepared for burial, proper burial now. But when it comes to Mariupol, I mean, that video also showed this war is taking a very big toll on President Zelensky. I think personally. I think yesterday especially really rocked his core, seeing it in person, and I think that we're probably going to see some aftershocks coming from that as things continue, and as more news comes out, as more areas are liberated. I think that the bad news may continue to come forth, which is unfortunate, but the more it comes forth, the more the world knows about it, the less Russia can do to try to hide what's going on. And we'll get to a little bit of that also later. As we move up towards Dnipro, here in Novomoskvosk, in near Dnipro, you can as the fighting has increased along the eastern front, you can see even more evidence of it the further away you go, because they're using heavier and heavier and heavier weapons and munitions to try to break the Ukrainian will to fight. And as more gets fielded there, this will continue. But from Dnipro, you can see the absolute sheer destructive power of some of these weapon systems from pretty significantly far from behind the lines. By our estimates, let's take a look here. I mean, from Donetsk, it's 138 miles for us. Well, we use I'm in America, so we use miles. It's at least 60 miles to the front here, from our estimations of where the front is. So it's a pretty significant area. And we can see it's not a very short distance at all, and we can see the level of destruction coming out of these places, clear from Dnipro. So let's go ahead and take a look at that photo. I mean, it lights up the night sky. These are not very small munitions being used. These are heavy bombardment and heavy equipment. So it's pretty crazy what's going on along this front as the war continues, and as Russia is really ramping up that campaign of brutality here in the eastern front and in the southern front. And as we move up towards Kherson, we have a little bit more good news. Now, for those that don't know, red means it's good for Russia, good for Russia, or it's Russian focused. Yellow is Ukraine focused. We've usually had a lot of yellow. Today, unfortunately, there's a lot of red because there hasn't been a lot of good news for Ukraine come out today that we could independently verify. There was some funny stuff, but we couldn't find where it was going on, so we couldn't really put it here. We're trying to keep this to where everything we know at least the general location of it, if it was in the northeast or if it was around Sumy or something like that. But today, near Mykolaiv, here along this front, this counteroffensive front that's being pushed from Mykolaiv towards Kherson, we see that Ukraine continues to fight on and continues to just batter the Russians over and over and over again with absolute withering fire. This counteroffensive has gained a pretty decent amount of good ground since it began about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago at this point, and we're going to see some more here of Russians getting slapped a little bit, getting slapped around. So let's take a look. Sorry, it's not great footage, but a lot of these weapon systems, they're not like American drone footage. It's HD. It's, not everything's perfect. So obviously, the Russians aren't having a very fun time. I hope they wouldn't be, as they continue to get battered back towards Kherson to the point that they, to an extent, have prepared. They've mined the bridge here, and they've also pulled their helicopter forces, their helicopters, back. So from Kherson, so I have a feeling they're not expecting to hold this ground much longer. They have prepared, they have set conditions to remove their forces across the river, across the Dnieper River, and basically cut themselves off so that way the Ukrainian forces can't just push and continue on towards Crimea. And with that, that is the wrap-up of the news inside of Ukraine. There is still some more news. We are going to cover some topics worldwide, and we have some pretty interesting stuff about different countries sending stuff to Ukraine. But that is all of the news inside of the country itself. There has been some pretty interesting developments. We've seen more footage coming out of Mariupol. The fighting is definitely ramping up. The terror in the Donbas, as what I have named this video, is definitely ramping up. This nitric gas tank explosion is terrifying because it's essentially using chemical weapons without using chemical weapons. Because it is highly poisonous, it will kill you rather quickly. And so, with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the international news. And the first thing of international news, we always like to start kind of closest to Ukraine, and that's going to be coming out of Belarus. Belarus has been the staging area for Russia since prior to the invasion. They, for all intents and purposes, Belarus may as well at this point be Russia, because there's probably more Russian forces in Belarus than there may be inside of Ukraine at this point, as they have withdrawn. But we're seeing, though, still that equipment is getting transported into the country of Belarus, even after the withdrawal from the north, which makes no sense if they're going to push to the east. That's kind of concerning, at least from my point of view. However, this is what we're seeing. This is the reports that we've been getting. We've been getting them for well over a week now. Every single day, there's been some kind of movement of military equipment inside of the country of Belarus, usually in and around Gomel or along the Ukrainian border. And so we have a couple different videos today. Here we have more Russian equipment on the move near Mazir. We also have some more stuff coming into Gomel. So let's take a look at those each in turn.
Ой, бля, заебали они со своим металлоломом нахуй уже, блядь!
That man was not very happy about that. Same with Gomel. Gomel is pretty much one of the main staging points inside of the country of Belarus for Russian forces. It always has been, has lots of railheads that Russia, being one of the only countries in the world that still uses rail as a main mode of transportation, with armored train cars that are very much reminiscent of World War I and World War II being used to transport some of these and continue moving that stuff freely throughout the country. We have more stuff inside of Gomel that shows that Russian forces continue to build there, and more materials and men continue to flow into this area despite there being no active offensives in the northern area of the front.
Смотри, блядь.
This is not a small bit of equipment either. And it looks like they're even using some of the commandeered vehicles, as we saw some V's on those civilian vehicles. Over 2 minutes, if you look down here, of equipment in Belarus near Gomel. That's a long convoy, especially when they're both driving and you're both going opposite directions. That is a long convoy of troops and equipment. Lots of BTRs, which is very concerning, as we know that the Russians have pulled out of this area. We know that the Russians, who for months said, no, we're not going to, it's just military exercises. You know, Ukraine has nothing to worry about. They invaded Ukraine. They did the same thing. They said, no, we're not committing these atrocities. We are avoiding civilian casualties. They committed atrocities just northwest, within 20 kilometers of the center of the capital city of Ukraine. They committed horrific atrocities. We know that. There's plenty of evidence of it. And they are, and 90% of Mariupol, probably closer to 100% at this point, because that was the last report that came out weeks ago. Almost 100% of Mariupol is completely bombed out, and they bombed the theater, which had children marked on both sides of it because it was being used as a huge shelter in the city, so people wouldn't get killed. There's over 400 people in that shelter. We've seen them shoot protesters at Kherson and Enerhodar. So I don't know. And this is the personally concerning part. Stuff keeps flowing into this region instead of getting transported to the east part of their offensive in the Donbas. We do know more stuff is going into the Donbas now, but there's still stuff coming into the north in Belarus along the Belarusian and Ukrainian border, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. So I wonder if we'll see another attempt, another offensive that pushes southward and tries to take Kiev from Belarus again, and they just are using this as almost like a tactical pause, like, hold on, wait a moment, time out. And they're going to use this to kind of gather their thoughts, gather their forces and equipment, and try and make a second drive. Or if this is just precautions in case, quote-unquote, Ukraine tries to invade Belarus or Russia. However, moving on from that, in much better news for Ukraine. We got today information that there was another explosion that occurred in Belgorod. We do not know the cause. We know last time it was attacks from 2 Mi-24 Hinds that were likely Ukrainian. They went and they hit an oil facility. We see yet another explosion today. We have photo evidence of that happening in Belgorod. It's not much, but that's pretty distinctive. It's not like a house on fire. That was an explosion. That's the plume cloud from an explosion. So we don't know the details. We don't know what it was, what hit it, who's taking responsibility. Was it Russia screwing up a rocket strike? Was it Ukraine hitting those oil facilities again because they only got X amount of tanks of oil in that and they are trying to hit more? We don't know, but we do know it happened. So with that, we're going to continue up on into Russia. And we got some pretty interesting news, concerning news. We got this from, we have a couple of translators who are actually from Eastern Europe. They are researchers and translators for us. They are the ones that find a lot of this information for me so I can help put this together. Then they're on the team, so big props to them. They found out that rape and looting has been decriminalized by Russian law inside of combat zones, meaning that those acts are officially no longer punishable by Russian law as long as it's conducted inside of a combat zone. AKA the same kind of stuff that we were seeing in Hostomel, Bucha, Irpin, Chernobyl. I think, if I can remember how to pronounce this city's name, Mirkinev? I think that's how it's pronounced. Either way, you get the picture. And not long afterwards, not long after they actually changed and decriminalized these acts, the Russian government took that state website, and you now have to have special access to actually view those laws and hence the changes to those laws. We actually have photos of the fact that you need special access to see these things. So this is one from Twitter regarding the changes. And this was actually pulled by one of our own. This, you have to have access. This is from the state media website. This it's crazy. They changed it completely to where it's decriminalized. You can't be punished for it. Russia is now openly said that they will not punish these war crimes. And they're changing their access to these laws in order to stop the spread of information. However, they weren't fast enough and the cat's out of the bag now. So I'm sure we'll start seeing more and more about this in the future. But you probably heard it here, folks. They're not going to punish war crimes anymore. Not that I don't think they would in the first place, but they definitely aren't now. And not only that, but out of Moscow, from a state news agency, and we have the actual article. I'm going to go onto a Russian website here. That was translated to English, and it endorses the complete destruction of Ukraine, saying that the denazification process also means that it's the de-Ukrainianization process. And endorsing genocide because they believe that you cannot simply punish the government, you must now punish also the people, because most of them are also Nazis. This is from a state-run media website in Russia, in Moscow. Here, take a look. If you think I'm kidding, we had this verified. Translators also did this. This was verified with other independent sources. Here we go to translate from Russia. So it is unbelievable the kind of things that we're now seeing. And this, once again, this is state run. So this means that this kind of information is coming from the Kremlin itself. This is stuff that's being pushed by the government. Because all independent news sources essentially inside of Russia have been stripped out of the country. It's now all state media run. And it's just abhorrent. Denazification will inevitably also be de-Ukrainianization, a rejection of the large-scale artificial inflation of the ethnic component of the self-identification of the population in the territories of historical Malorussia and Novorossiya, which were started by the Soviet authorities. The Bandera elite must be liquidated. Its re-education is impossible. The social swamp, which actively and passively supported it by action and inaction, must survive the hardships of war and assimilate the experience of a historical lesson and redemption of its guilt. It is... We're going to go ahead and stop reading that because I've already read it once. It's absolutely terrifying to read that there's that a country, a first world nation in the 21st century is basically saying, yeah, destroying the country and killing all of its people for being quote unquote Nazis is okay. I know we're supposed to be trying to be unbiased here, but the blatancy of something, let's say again, we try to be unbiased, but the blatancy means that you can't deny things that are so obvious and blatant continually without being wrong. You can't kill innocent people and get away with it. You can't just kill innocent people. You cannot say things that are supportive of genocide over and over. You can't. You can't do that as a country. You cannot do that as a world power, which I'm sure Russia will soon be a regional power when Ukraine gets through with them. But you can't say those things. And to be so blatantly obvious, for us to simply go onto a Russian news media website and read those things and have it translated via Google, via third parties, via our own, and they're all saying the same thing, which means we know it has to be right, it's abhorrent, it's terrible, it's horrendous, and I mean, call it biased point of view, but the fact it's at this point has become so blatant that it's facts, and the facts speak for themselves. Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, Chernobyl. Now, we've heard some minor reports and rumors out of the Sumy area of similar events. The media that's being pushed by state-controlled websites, which means it's government-backed, are all saying the same things. The photos and the videos are saying the same things. And so at this point, it's no longer speculation, it is now fact. And that, right there, is the news. Nothing but the facts. And so, moving on, we go to Estonia, and Estonia donated 220 million euros of lethal aid to Ukraine today. That is including anti-tank guns, that is including munitions, disposable rockets, miscellaneous equipment, whether that's jackets or plate carriers, helmets, etc., grenades. They sent it all. They sent the whole laundry list of here's everything you need to fight a war. Let's have some of each. And they sent it today. 220 million euros worth of equipment to Ukraine as lethal aid. Massive, massive amount of donation. And they're not the only ones. Czechia, formerly the Czech Republic, has donated 40 T-72 tanks and BMP-1s to Ukraine as well. We actually see them on rail cars, but let's go ahead and take a look here. So the whole video, there's just kind of ogling at this entire like train of tanks and BMPs. So what's crazy about this is that the Czechia and Estonia are not the largest countries in the world. They're not. Their militaries aren't the largest things in the world either. And while in the grand scale of things, when we're talking about how many tanks and everything Russia has deployed versus Ukraine, they're not big numbers of things that they're sending. They're not huge, significant numbers. The important thing here, and this is the same mentality behind the donations in the fundraisers below. If you can't, every time I say you can't give a lot, give a little. The reason I say that is because the United States just sent $300 million, another $220 million in drones. They sent 600 more Switchblade drones today to Ukraine as part of that lethal aid package that they're sending. That's not all they sent, but that's part of it. Then they're either en route or in Ukraine already, because that's coming from the U.S. Department of Defense. But the United States is spending about the same amount as Estonia is right now on their lethal aid package. And the same thing, like I said, they're not large countries, but it's a huge contribution for their forces. 40 tanks is not going to change the war, but for Czechia, that's a huge hit to their reserves, because Czechia doesn't have a huge tank force. So they're giving, for what they can give, they're giving a huge amount. So they're going well above and beyond what they can give, because they're not, like I said, they're not very large countries or large militaries by themselves. So what they're sending and the amount of what they're sending is a huge amount for what they have. So it's kind of a similar ideology whenever I say, if you can't give a lot, give a little. So same, likewise, if you want to support the actual war effort, there's a donation for Come Back Alive. There's a donation link there that actually goes to buying equipment for Ukrainian forces. The rest of them support humanitarian efforts going on in Ukraine, whether that's life-saving support from Doctors Without Borders, or whether that's other humanitarian efforts in and around Ukraine and Poland, Hungary, Romania, and so on and so forth. Also, with some international news here, the Russian Hydra market, which is the largest and longest running black market on the dark net, on the dark web, was shut down by a joint effort between Germany and the United States Justice Department today. It is no longer operational. It has been completely shut down. And so that means that the black market, the largest black market on the dark web, is no longer there. They officially took it down today. It was Russian, at least Russian sponsored, not state sponsored, but it was all listed in Russian. All of their listings were in Russian. The base language was Russian. So that has been shut down. However, we do not believe that it is actually sponsored, just probably someone with a lot of money in that country. And as we move on to other parts of the world here, Azerbaijan actually ended up confiscating from the civilian population weapons and equipment left behind by the Armenian forces after they had their little back and forth a few years ago. And they captured quite a significant quite a significant amount of equipment from the civilian population here in this western portion. So let's take a look at that. Now, a lot of it just seems completely rusted out. It's been sitting in storage, so I don't think anyone was planning anything with this, but they had it, and the Azerbaijani police did confiscate that. Nothing out of Israel, Lebanon, which we know just declared bankruptcy, or Syria today. The Islamic State hasn't really done anything that we know of today. That's probably because they've used most of their sleeper cells at this point that they had in the region, or at least they're probably planning the next round of attacks. But it seems to have calmed down Islamic State wise. But in Baghdad, an unknown assailant used an improvised explosive device to attack an engineer at his home. The engineer's name is Hussein al-Ubadi, and we don't know why he was attacked. We don't know really who this guy really is. He probably works for the government. He lives in Diyala Governorate in Iraq. Governates in Iraq, which is just northeast of Baghdad. And so we can see the damage to the front of his house was pretty significant. It blew the gates off and completely blew it open. He was unharmed from our understanding, but we also have a video here to show you of the actual attack itself, probably from the attacker. And so while it was a pretty decent sized explosion for such a small explosive, he was just fine from our understanding. He wasn't injured. It definitely startled him. We don't know who did it. We don't know who's behind it. We also don't know why he was targeted, why this engineer was targeted. But I'm sure that information may be forthcoming in the future. And so we'll go ahead and move on. And the next bit of news is something that's a little bit unusual, and that's news coming out of Iran. Now, Iran, normally the news we have comes out from the Iran's government here in Tehran, or it's because the Iranian Republican Guard Corps, or the IRGC, usually is firing missiles or rockets, or there is Iranian-backed fighters like Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq who are attacking U.S. forces or coalition forces or Iraqi forces or anybody. And that's normally the news we get, such as the missiles that were fired near the consulate in Erbil from Iran. However, today there's something a little bit different, and that is that a knife attack at a Shiite shrine in Iran actually ended up killing 2 people, injured another. We have a photo of the 3 victims here. And then we actually have a video of the aftermath and what appears to be the arrest of the assailant and a very angry Shiite crowd at that temple. So let's take a look. So we do know that the assailant was captured. The whoever was wielding the knife was captured. However, the motives behind the attack are still not known. So we're gonna go ahead and move on. And we have more information coming out of Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been rocked by several, is what has been suspected or has been officially verified as Islamic State attacks, as the bombing in Herat was claimed by the Islamic State. And there's been several other bombings that have happened in and around Kabul, including the currency exchange, and also a Taliban truck was also detonated that ended up killing, I believe, 3 people. Today, we've also seen some resistance movements up here in the north near the tribal regions. And that comes from the rebel fighter Ahmed Massoud, whose father actually fought the Taliban as the leader of the Northern Alliance and actually assisted coalition forces during the invasion in 2001-2002, and retaking some key cities, including Mazar-e-Sharif up in northern and Kunduz. However, this group is separate now. There is a separate entity in Afghanistan, in the Kabul capital region, who is now coming forth publicly and saying they are ready to commit acts of violence against the Taliban and resist Taliban control within the Kabul region. And this comes from the Supreme Council of National Resistance, or also known as the SCNC. And they actually released this video today.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. مردم شرافتمند افغانستان، ما سربازان جمعیت اسلامی افغانستان آماده هر نوع مبارزه با دشمن قسم خورده میهن خود هستیم. در صورتی که محترم استاد عطا محمد نور رهبر جمعیت اسلامی افغانستان و عضو ارشد شورای عالی مقاومت ملی جمهوری اسلامی افغانستان برای ما هدایت دهد، تحرکات خویش را در نقاط مختلف این کشور آغاز نموده تا آزادی مردم و نجات کشور از شر تروریستان از هیچ نوع فداکاری دریغ نخواهیم کرد. و سلام سربازان جمعیت اسلامی افغانستان و ولسوالی‌های کابل.
So I can only personally listen to something like that so long, because the more and more I look at it, the more and more it gives me the kind of feeling like something the Islamic State would put out when they kidnap somebody. But regardless, just so that we're not pushing propaganda, I was just going to cut it short. Just wanted to give you the idea. But there is a new resistance movement that has formed in Kabul. They are ready to commit violent acts against the Taliban, actively resist Taliban control in the region. And at this point, because we don't know, it was suspected the Islamic State was behind the attacks in the Kabul area. Now that this group has come forth, it's in question as to whether or not that was the Islamic State or this new resistance movement that actually conducted those attacks on the Taliban truck earlier, that Taliban patrol, or the currency exchange center. That is now up in the air for discussion as to whether or not it was the Islamic State or this new group that is now gone public. And that's it for the Middle East. However, we have one point down here in Africa, and that is that another Nigerian military convoy was hit. At least 15 service members were killed. Another about 20 were injured by unknown attackers. Yet another group that is not been named yet, and no one knows who they are. And dozens of militants apparently attacked this convoy. They went up to it after the attack, seized a bunch of weapons, munitions, and equipment, and then fled. Before the Nigerian military really had a chance to react. They got hit, they stole a bunch of items, and then they left. And the Nigerian forces were left to pick up the pieces. And so we actually see here today some photos of that. This comes as pretty much all week there has been some pretty significant violence coming out of Nigeria. There was a train that was attacked, that 168 people are still missing and no group is claimed. Boko Haram fighters have surrendered. We've seen Islamic State attacks all over the east here. We've seen multiple attacks via by different groups that have yet to be named on Nigerian military convoys. We've seen offensives, skirmishes in the region. It's been a pretty interesting week for Nigeria and for this part of the region as well entirely. Democratic Republic of the Congo, we had some stuff going on. Burkina Faso had some stuff going on. Mozambique and the Democratic Republic, once again, the Islamic State cells pledged their allegiance, and we know that there were likely attacks that followed, but we were unable to get any information on what happened after they pledged their allegiance to the new leader of the Islamic State. There's been a lot of interesting developments inside this region of Africa. We do know that there has been coalition forces in the area. There are French currently in Mali that are conducting operations. The United States military has a crisis response force out of Djibouti that responds to crises inside of Africa, and much like they have one in Kuwait for the same thing for the Middle East. And so it's very interesting seeing all of these developments happen at once within the continent. Europe and the United States are not the only ones sending aid to Ukraine, however. As we go down here into the Pacific, we can see that Australia is actually sending, they actually repainted, refitted 4 of their famous Bushmaster MRAPs, and they're being flown aboard a C-17 Globemaster over to a neighboring country, and then they're going to be handed over to Ukrainian forces. And we can actually see they're not kidding about this. It's painted right there on the side. And so the first 4 are currently supposedly en route. Should be, while not a significant help, it's definitely a very good vehicle. It's been very reliable in combat zones as Australian forces have been working with coalitions in the Middle East, and we're happy to see that they're sending more aid and doing it as expeditiously as they can, taking it there by C-17. So very good to see that. Very happy to see Australia getting in on the action there. In Peru today, curfews were imposed by the government because the citizens there have started to become a little bit disgruntled with their government. Much like the rest of the world, I'd say even more so, countries that are a little bit poorer economically have been very hard hit as the global economy has taken this kind of slump due to the ongoing crisis in Ukraine and the ongoing war and invasion. The international community has imposed dire sanctions on Russia to the point that Russia's economy is on the verge of collapse. However, that has raised food prices, as Ukraine is actually one of the largest exporters of grain in the world. They're considered the breadbasket of Europe. And it's driven fuel prices and food prices higher and higher worldwide. This especially impacts major countries that are much poorer economically than say most of Europe or the United States and North America. And so this has caused a lot of protests and unrest inside the country. So to try and curb that, they are now putting a curfew in place and try and prevent some of that unrest from growing into something that's more violent. And we can actually have a picture of that here today. They're not the only one. There are currently some concerns that a lot of the humanitarian aid initially that was going to Ukraine had to be pulled from other areas of the world, including food that was originally designated to go to Ethiopia and other food insecure nations. So that is something that the international community and the United Nations is currently working to resolve. There were some of the very first convoys to reach parts of Ethiopia for humanitarian aid for the first time since the war began. However, those concerns are starting to rear their head that there may not be enough humanitarian aid to go to both Ukraine and other parts of the world that may have food, water, or shelter insecurities at this point. So just keep that in mind going forward, that we may see some more issues globally in some of those more vulnerable nations as the war continues. We already covered the 600 Switchblade drones. The Switchblade drones are really cool, coming from the United States. I had some friends that actually went to the course for them. If you've ever played Call of Duty, Black Ops 2, then you probably know what I'm talking about. The hunter-killer drone that you can literally throw, and you can fly it all the way, and it just hits the target and explodes. That is basically what the Switchblade is. The Switchblade, you can carry it in a backpack. You shoot it out of a tube. You can fly it around for almost, I think it's 30 minutes. And you can actually fly it yourself, or you can track onto a target, and then you can actually fly it into the target. Front end hits, crushes the front end, and the whole thing explodes. So it's literally a hunter-killer drone. So they're really cool. They haven't been used before, to my knowledge, in a combat setting. So it'll be very interesting to see how they perform against Russian forces. I'm sure, much like the Javelin, the In-Law, and all of the other aid that's been provided to Ukraine, Ukraine's probably going to know exactly how they want to use them, and they're probably going to do some magnificent art with that. When I say art, I mean the art of warfare. So it'll be interesting to see as the reports come in of their use. And much like every night, we try to end our nights on a little bit of a more uplifting notes and a little bit of a happier note. And today we actually have something pretty interesting. It came out a little bit ago. It's not exactly today's news, but it's very recent. And that is that San Diego Zoos has a conservation department that is located right next door, and they are known as the Frozen Zoo, quote unquote, because they keep frozen samples of wildlife species from all over the world, including many endangered species. And at this point, already 4 different endangered species have had clones made from these samples. And with the continual loss of habitats and food for these different types of species in the world, and through poaching and climate change, deforestation, expansion of civilian populaces, pollution, this has threatened wildlife in Africa and in the Amazon and globally, to the point that many species every year are, to an extent, either going extinct or becoming extremely endangered. And with this Frozen Zoo, the successes they've had with the cloning technology here means that these specimens can be either used to bring back populations of animals for future generations that go extinct, or they could even be used to help repopulate some of these species that are currently on the verge of extinction. It's still very primitive. It's in its first walks and beginnings, but they have successfully done cloning. Cloning's been around for a while now, but they have successfully cloned some of these samples, so they know it's viable to store them and freeze them for long periods of time, and then successfully bring a live creature to this world from those samples, which could preserve many of these creatures that we have on Earth currently that may not be with us much longer for future generations to come. And so with that, we have covered all of the news in the world. That's all of the highlights. That's all of the news that we were able to find from our sources. Of course, we don't touch on things like American politics or what the Canadian president is saying, and we stay away from any what's rather obvious propaganda we can. But it's good to see that there's some interesting developments lethal aid package wise. It's unfortunate to see the kind of things that are going on inside of Ukraine once again. While I say that we try and stay unbiased, and we do, once things become so blatant that they are now facts are the news, and that's kind of the stance we're taking at this point, or at least I am personally taking at this point. Regarding what's going on in Ukraine, I hope to see a lot less red dots and a lot more yellow dots tomorrow, as more hopefully good news for Ukraine comes out, and as some of these lethal package lethal aid packages actually arrive in country to support them. And hopefully, all in all, hopefully tomorrow we'll have some good news to be able to deliver instead of having to just keep laying on this really difficult stuff to digest. And so with that, I want to thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank you guys for supporting the channel. If you like what we're doing, go ahead, please feel free to like and subscribe. You don't have to, but it really helps us out, spreads our reach. Once we get large enough to be monetized, we'll do fundraisers on every single stream we do. Until that time, the links for a bunch of fundraisers that we have vetted so that you know the money's going where it needs to go are currently in the description below. If you can't give a lot, at least give a little. Everything helps, much like Estonia and Czechia. And so if you want to talk amongst some of the other members of the community here, we do have a Discord. The link is in there as well as on our page. You can go ahead and check out some of our older videos to catch up if you're just joining us for the first time here. And I want to give a huge shout out to the staff. The staff here, the volunteers. This thing would not be possible without them. They're amazing. They have very great sources that we can get independent news sources from. And we can bring you a lot of this stuff live, and they translate it directly for us because they speak things like Russian and Ukrainian, and it's absolutely amazing to independently be able to verify some of the information we're getting. So huge props to the research and translation staff. Huge props to the volunteer staff in general. They're very much active and making this thing kick and be alive. So couldn't do it without them, and I really appreciate them. So make sure you show them that your support as well. With that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for the night. I hope you and your families stay safe. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we will see you again at 10 p.m. tomorrow Eastern Time or 9 p.m. Central Time. Once again, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.